Okay, hello and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight or whenever you are watching this recording. And if you are on YouTube, we encourage you to like our video and subscribe to our channel to make sure that you get all great Laurel history videos from Laurel and beyond. My name is Ann Bennett. I'm the Executive Director of the Laurel Historical Society here in Maryland. I am joined by the rest of our staff, Abby Carver and Luis, and we have returning with us after a year's absence, Tina Simmons. Tina was with us last year, if you recall. She did a fantastic presentation on the Forest Hill Asylum, and that also is on our YouTube channel. So if you have not seen that recording on a really tragic piece of Laurel's history and the fascinating research that Tina and some other folks did, please do check that out, and we'll try to put that link into the follow-up email as well. So this webinar is being recorded, as we said, and we are going to talk about some really unique burials in Laurel and then a little far field in Central Maryland. And what we mean by unique is kind of anything that's a little unusual. That could be what is buried. Notice I said what and not who. So we're going to talk about some unusual human burials as well as burying of other animals. And then also the manner in which they were buried might be unusual as well. So there's a couple of stories that we wanted to share with you, get you hooked on some unusual aspects of history here in our area. And let you get started on a historical foot for spooky season. So please, if you have any questions or comments, let us hear from you as we go through our talk tonight. You can put any comments you have in the chat. And if you have a question for any of our speakers, please feel free to put that into the Q&A. So I will just pause a second and start sharing my screen. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. So we are going to talk about, again, the unusual or unique burials in Central Maryland. And we are going to go through a couple different unique burials, like I mentioned. So we're going to talk about Mary Ann, but Mary Ann is an elephant. And we're going to talk about a corporal, but the corporal is a dog. And we're going to talk about some other burials here in Laurel, specifically at Laurel Park. Before heading to Ivy Hill Cemetery, which is the image here in our introductory slide. And then we have a couple bonus additions for you so that you can explore if you are feeling adventurous this spooky season. And as always, we'll end with question and answers and announcements about our upcoming events. So thank you everyone for being here. I am very excited to welcome again Tina Simmons back to Laurel, at least virtually. Tina is no stranger to Laurel or to researching in this area. She's a fantastic researcher, historian, and genealogist based in Anne Arundel County. Like I mentioned, she did our Forest Haven webinar for us last year. So we're very happy to welcome Tina back. And Tina, if you would like to tell us a little more about your background and get us started in our Happy Haunt webinar.
I'm a member of the Anne Arundel Genealogical Society. I've been researching cemeteries in Anne Arundel County, both the cemeteries and their occupants for about 40 years. And I'm also on the board of the Coalition to Protect Maryland Burial Sites. What started as transcriptions has evolved into photographing cemeteries, tombstones, and looking for records other than the photographs. I look for death certificates and obituaries, all sorts of things like that to help round out the picture. I'm going to be speaking to you about two of the animals buried at the Rosa Bonheur Memorial Park. That's in Elkridge, right on the Howard County, Anne Arundel County line. And it is one of the unique cemeteries in Maryland and probably further afield that has both humans and pets buried together. A lot of cemeteries have a separate pet section, and some commercial cemeteries have pets buried with their individual owners, but it's sort of few and far between. The first one I want to talk to you about is Mary Ann. Mary Ann was an Asian elephant who was born in the wild, and she was born in India, and she was brought to Maryland in 1926. There was an elephant house built for her at the Maryland Zoo, and the money for her housing and to bring the elephant here was collected by children in Baltimore City, donating pennies. Um, she was purchased for the cost of $700, and she was the first elephant ever exhibited at the zoo. When she was 42 years old, she was sleeping and injured her spine, and she was subsequently euthanized. She is buried in the Laurel or in the Rosa Bonheur Cemetery. While she was still alive, half of the house was housing Mary Ann. The other half of the house housed a hippopotamus. He was named George, and he lived at the opposite end of the building. And Mary Ann received an official burial because she was so well known and so popular. The second one that I want to tell you about, also buried at Rosa Bonheur, is Corporal Rex Albin. He was a combat dog who served during World War II with the U.S. Marines, and he served on Bougainville Island in 1943, and later at the Guadalcanal campaign at the Battle of Tinian. He was a 2-year-old Doberman, and he warned the Marines who were stationed there to let them know that there were Japanese soldiers nearby and protected them. He was promoted to the rank of corporal by the Marine Corps in 1944, and he is buried near the center of the cemetery with a marker noting his service to the country. Okay, and I want to pass that along to Luis.
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about Mountain Rose 2. Mountain Rose 2 was a racehorse that was owned by the Chapman family from here in Laurel. And he was extremely successful enough to maintain the household. We don't know his exact winnings, but we know he was frequent to the winner's circle. His last victory actually occurred on October 10th, 1924, so 100 years as of tomorrow, which is kind of cool. Sadly, 2 weeks after his last victory, he broke his leg during a race at Laurel Park, and his owner, Ben Chapman, decided to euthanize him and buried him right there at the park. So as a way to sort of honor and revere him for eternity, as he said. If you want to go to the next slide. So here's the gravestone for Mountain Rose 2, the left. I'm not sure the date of that picture, but you can see it before the dorms and everything was built behind it at the backstretch of Laurel Park. And then on the right is the most recent one that I took myself back in August. You want to go to the next slide? And then next to Mountain Rose 2, there is there's a toy and little bear statue that's actually the gravesite for Preakness the cat, who's a cat owned by one of the backstretch workers that lived in the dorms after they were built. So sometime after 1994, and he chose to bury him right there next to Mountain Rose 2.
Could I just jump in a second? The portrait that they showed in the former slide, the one before that one, that hung over the fireplace in Mr. Chapman's house, the owner of the horse. And his daughter, who is the Scaglierini, his daughter asked their mother why that was hanging over the family fireplace. And she said it was because that horse paid for their house.
And that's actually one of the two or maybe three pictures that they know to exist of Mountain Rose 2, which is, for as successful as he was, is pretty surprising. But yeah, you're right. And then yeah.
Okay, well, great, thank you. And Louise, do you want to say that we have pictures in our collection as well? We kind of stumbled upon them again. It's always nice to kind of rediscover things. Okay, all right. So I guess that is me then. So I'm going to talk about another unusual burial of honor here in Laurel. And it's a nice segue because we talked about Mountain Rose 2, which is buried intact at Laurel Park, which is kind of unusual for a horse burial. And we talked about Preakness the cat, which is an actual feline. But now we are going to talk about Ben's cat. And you might be thinking we're going to talk about another cat. That is not the case. So we are going to be talking about a dark bay, almost black gelding, as you can tell, sporting his white and orange, neon orange silks. And the horse's name is Ben's cat. So we're going to be talking about the story of Ben's cat and the unusual burial as well for both him and Mountain Rose. So just a little bit of background, again, just to talk about the history as well as some of the unusual burials here in the Laurel area. So Ben's cat's sire, which is like the male horse, his dad, is named Parker's Storm Cat. So Parker's Storm Cat can I'm sorry, we just got a chat that people can only see the speakers and not the slides. Is that true? Everyone give me a thumbs up or put something in the chat if if you can only see the people and not the slides. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. So we can see the slides in both. Perfect. Okay. Thank you for that. Just wanted to make sure that everyone can see that. So we'll have to just double check the settings in a minute. But let me tell you a little bit about the pedigree of Ben's cat. So the father was Parker's Storm Cat, which is the name of the horse, and Parker's Storm Cat only won one race, but he comes from a very good pedigree. So his father was Storm Cat, and Storm Cat's, I think, great-grandfather horse was Secretariat, which is one of the most famous racehorses of all time, a Triple Crown winner. And they come from Country Farm Life in Bel Air, Maryland, in Harford County. Which is Maryland's oldest thoroughbred breeding farm, and it's known for champions going back until the 1930s, like Raisin Native, Saggy, Cigar, Carryback, and Malibu Moon. And so Ben Cat's dam or mother horse was Two Fox, whose sire was 38 Paces, and they were both part of the Leatherberry stables and raced at Pimlico in the 1980s. So definitely has a very good pedigree for a racehorse. Ben's cat was trained under Maryland native and University of Maryland graduate King T. Leatherberry. He was the fifth highest winning U.S. horse trainer. Ben's cat is a local legend, especially in the Maryland horse breeding and horse racing circles, but also nationally known as well. He was a very spirited runner, and you can see some of the statistics here. And according to the Maryland Thoroughbred Hall of Fame, he became the all-time leader by number of state-bred championship titles, 17 in all, including 4 consecutive votes for Horse of the Year. And as we'll see in the next slide, he won over $2.6 million in winnings for over 63 starts and 32 wins. So that's very, very impressive, but it's even more impressive given the fact that he didn't start racing until he was 4 years old, which is twice as old as when thoroughbreds typically start racing. Typically, they're in like a 2-year-old race and they go up from there. So he made his racing debut at Pimlico on May 8th, 2010, and he won by nearly 2 lengths in front of all the other horses. And he duplicated that feat just 6 weeks later at Delaware Park, again winning by almost 2 lengths. He started 7 times in the Maryland Million and won 3 times. And just as a quick plug, the Maryland Million is actually this weekend, Saturday on October 12th, and the Laurel Historical Society will be having a table there, and we're going to be passing out our history guides to Laurel Park, and you'll be able to look at some of our pictures and get some of the historical timeline from Laurel Park. So if you're in the area and you're going to the Jim McKay Maryland Million, we hope to see you there. Please stop by and see us. And then what else can we say about Ben's cat? He was very good at both dirt track and turf, and he was very good at both different furlongs or different mile, tenths of a mile of the racing circuits, but most of what he won was under a mile in length. So from 2010 to 2014, he averaged about 5 races a year, including beating numerous Breeders' Cup winners in 2011. And then one race that put him kind of on the national radar was the Jim McKay Turf Sprint on the Preakness Day undercard. And like we said, he started 7 times and won it 5 times. The very last time he won it was at age 10, which is pretty old for a racehorse of this caliber, in 2016, and that actually would be his final victory. So from the spring of 2016 until June of 2017, he did race, but he never placed higher than 2nd. And then Leatherberry, his trainer, decided to retire him in June of 2017. He was sent to retire at a farm in Kentucky, but tragically he died less than 1 month after being sent to Kentucky after complications from surgery. And so he was cremated. Ben's cat was cremated and sent back to Laurel, to Maryland, and he was buried at a ceremony next to the Laurel Park paddock that fall. And so these are pictures that Tina took, and so you can see the paddock kind of in the back, kind of the cool down area, and then there is a plaque next to it that you can see. So as it says, during his career of 63 races, 22 were at Laurel. So that's a very high percentage, and 11 of his 32 wins came at the track where he was based and where he is currently buried. And so what's unusual about him is the fact that he's here at Laurel Park. As we know, there's not many buried at Laurel Park, and unlike Mountain Rose, it's just his ashes. And what's unusual in general about horse burials, whether they're at Laurel Park or not, is that horses are usually cremated because they're very large and very heavy, and they're complicated logistics to to bury them. So racehorses especially are typically cremated, and if they're not cremated, then parts of them are typically buried. So you get kind of a ceremonial burial of the horse's head, its hooves, and its heart, representing its intelligence, its speed, and its spirit. So those are kind of a more typical kind of an honorable burial for winning racehorses. Again, it's pretty rare to bury a racehorse intact like Mountain Rose, although you do get some, like Secretariat was buried intact, and Barbaro famously at the Kentucky Derby. So those are some unusual horse burials as well, and including a couple here at Laurel Park. So Tina, I know you just took these pictures fairly recently, I believe. Did you have anything you wanted to say about how you took them, or how you came to find Ben's cat?
We took a private tour of Laurel Park not long ago, and we were led to where Ben's cat was, where his ashes are buried. And we learned a couple other things about Mountain Rose that I hadn't known before. he was actually buried in his silks, in addition to being buried whole. So I thought that was kind of unusual.
I think so too.
The paddock where Ben's cat is buried, or where his ashes are buried, that's the oldest paddock in the country that's still in existence
Still used.
and still being used.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. And that's a great reminder too of Laurel Park's history, dating back to what, 1911, using as its as a state fair. Some things that again you can learn about if you come out to Maryland Million and see us. And I didn't know that about the silk. So again, you talking about the silks, it's the colors that the horse wears and that the jockey wears. So they usually have some, variation of like one or two colors, maybe stripes and stars and things like that. So Ben's cat was his colors, his silks were white and that neon orange. And I'm not sure what Mountain Rose's silks were, but again, that's another kind of a sign of a high burial and how much the horse was loved.
One other thing about Mountain Rose, years later, there was a race in Chicago that Ben Chapman's horse won. And as part of the prize, he received a blanket of roses, and he sent that blanket back to his wife in Laurel, and she put it on Mountain Rose's grave, and the seeds from the roses dropped off. And there are rose bushes near the grave that are from those original roses.
Oh, that's a really sweet story. I didn't know that, but I know obviously there's rose bushes, which is very appropriate. So it's even a nicer story to hear of its origin. Thank you, Tina. Okay, so that's all I have on Ben's cat. If we want to talk more about Laurel horse racing, we can do that too. But if not, I'm going to pass it over to Abby to take us a little closer into Laurel proper, into the historic district, and talk about some of the burials, a little bit of the history of Ivy Hill Cemetery. So thank you, Tina. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit about Ivy Hill, and I'm going to stress that Ivy Hill is so steeped in history that it is impossible to even get close to covering it. But we're going to give a bit of a brief overview for people that might not be familiar with Ivy Hill. So Ivy Hill's origin as a cemetery kind of begins in the mid 1800s, and like much of early Laurel, the way that it got started was due to the mill. So there was land near where Ivy Hill currently is that the Laurel Cotton Mill set aside for the burial of mill workers. Then later on in the late 1800s, you had a private company that purchased 8 acres of land next to those existing burial grounds. The deals that kind of followed that sale to the private company gives us the 150 families that can be seen on this early map on the slide. And some of those names that are on the map, which is not easily visible here because it's a very large map, are still familiar today. And are still names that you see in Laurel, such as Nichols, Skaggs, Lashire, Turney, Aitchison, and many others. In the years that follow the late 1800s, the Ivy Hill history is complex, and I can't stress that enough. At times, it can be really hard to follow. In roughly the 1940s, Ivy Hill merged with Greenwood Cemetery, and there was ownership drama after that that stretched into the 1950s when the case landed in court. The presiding judge ruled that the cemetery's finances were too confusing to sort out because of records being lost or burned or destroyed through other means. For the next 20 years, there wasn't really a clear ownership situation, and the cemetery rapidly deteriorated. In 1973, a group of Laurel residents organized the Ivy Hill Association, and in 1974, their nonprofit organization took over the cemetery. And I just have to say, like, the 1970s were a great year for nonprofits in history, because that's when we started as a historical society as well. So their nonprofit kind of brought a renaissance to Ivy Hill, although there are several challenges along the way. Visitors today to Ivy Hill can reflect at memorials for the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department, the Police Department, the Volunteer Rescue Squad, and the American Legion Post 60. Additionally, with those memorials, there's also an annual opportunity to remember fallen veterans with wreaths across America. And if you haven't heard of that, it's a great opportunity. Go look at it. I just wanted to be sure to mention it. Before we begin discussing the two interesting burials at Ivy Hill, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that it's very different to discuss people and their burials than it is to discuss animals. Though we all do really love our pets and our friends at the zoo, the people that we're about to discuss are real people who lived real lives in a place that many of us currently call home. Although their end of life or afterlife stories contain a unique element, their lives undoubtedly had many stories worth telling too. And we as a historical society strive to learn more stories about anyone in Laurel so that we can tell a more complete story of Laurel's past, present, and future. We hope to be able to expand on the stories of the people that I'm about to discuss tonight in the future. So let's get into these two stories. The first story is commonly referred to, if you see news articles about it, as the Petrified Woman. The Petrified Woman involves the 1894 exhumation of a 500-pound woman, Jane Tyson. She was not 500 pounds when she was originally buried. Her petrified body was exhumed from a nearby graveyard and reburied at Ivy Hill. And it's one of the great mysteries of the cemetery. According to the Baltimore Sun, on October 15th, 1894, it was reported that the week prior, family members had the remains of two relatives exhumed and transferred from their original burial place to Ivy Hill. The remains of the male descendant, who was 31 years old at the time of his passing, had almost entirely disappeared, which is normal. However, the remains of Jane, who was 16 years old at the time of her passing, they were in a complete state of preservation. They were being petrified into white marble, and like I said, she was almost 500 pounds by their estimate. Her corpse, the story continued, had neither been embalmed nor was ice used to preserve it. So they were really confused as to why it was in this petrified, very preserved state. Lifting her casket reportedly took 8 strong men. So why was this a mystery? So some remains from the 19th century are reported to be well preserved due to the use of cast iron coffins. There's a well-documented case of this in Alexandria, Virginia, even. However, what's known as the Petrified Woman at Ivy Hill doesn't involve a cast iron coffin, and that's where it gets a little strange. We don't know exactly why she's petrified, and that's kind of a mystery that's persisted. If you read our description of the webinar, you may have noticed that it said the Smithsonian got involved at some point, and you may be wondering, why was the Smithsonian involved? And that's a great question. In 1991, the Museum of Natural History was looking for more information about lead coffin or cast iron coffin burials and petrified remains. And they were also seeking to work with cemeteries that were at risk due to construction projects. For a brief moment in time, there was discussion of exhuming Miss Tyson, once again, this time for scientific purposes. For those concerned, Miss Tyson got to stay resting, and this project was never fulfilled. They did acknowledge that her burial was very interesting, and they aren't quite sure, they didn't have any ideas either as to why she was petrified. There is one other case of petrification in the absence of cast iron that's really well documented. It also occurred in the late 1800s. However, it occurred in Augusta, Georgia, and it was a very similar story. There was a young man, he was buried originally. He was buried in a wooden casket with a glass top. He was exhumed 4 years after his death, when the cemetery owner wanted to move him to a new plot slightly over. And it became kind of a spectacle. They reburied him. However, his second casket was later exhumed for scientific research in the 70s. If you go to read more about petrified burials in Augusta, Georgia, you'll find a couple. I'm not totally sure what's going on in Augusta, Georgia. That is a completely different question. Our second tale from Ivy Hill, you can see the stone that goes with this one on the left. It's going to be for Sophia Hoffman. And this is the story of Paris Green. This is one of the original spooky tales connected to Ivy Hill. And it's the story of Paris Green. So if your family has lived in Laurel for generations, you may already know the story of the young woman who tragically committed suicide by drinking Paris Green, an emerald-colored insecticide. According to early Laurel leaders, this apparently was a pretty prolific story told throughout Laurel in the 20s and 30s. After her passing, Sophia Hoffman, she passed away on October 22nd in 1901. And after her passing, her mother had a dream that she had been buried alive. And so her mother went and sought out the undertaker to rescue her daughter. Sadly, this was just a dream or a hopeful wish, and Sophia was proven to be truly dead after the undertaker exhumed her, and she was reinterred after that. So those are two interesting stories of Ivy Hill. There are many others. A lot of the early burials in Ivy Hill are very interesting, and there's a lot of history and a lot of stories connected to them. And we're excited to be able to tell more of those stories and share them with people. We do have a couple of bonus editions that I think several of us can kind of talk to. I will introduce them really quick, and then everyone is welcome to jump in with whatever they would like. So the first one is going to be Aspen Hill Memorial Park, and that is the photo with the cute dog looking at the cute dog statue. Aspen Hill is the 5th oldest pet cemetery in continuous operation in the US. It's over 100 years old. There are over 50,000 pets buried there and over 50 humans. They're currently owned by the Montgomery County Humane Society. Some famous pets buried here include several of J. Edgar Hoover's dogs, which is kind of cool and odd. And there also is a cat known as the Weather Prophet of Baltimore, who got a super long obituary that I think Tina could probably speak to. Like, they really loved this cat and really believed that it could tell the weather, I think. So it was beloved in Baltimore. The photo in the middle, many people might be familiar with this one, especially in October. This is Edgar Allan Poe's grave. His grave has its whole own backstory. This is not his original grave, it's the second one. Technically the third one, I guess, because the second one got destroyed and never got installed. There also is the lore surrounding his grave and the Poe toaster, the shadowy figure. And then our third photo right here is the grave of John Wilkes Booth. And John Wilkes Booth was actually buried 3 separate times. So this is his 3rd burial, and it is in Baltimore. So everyone else, feel free to jump in and share any additional that you would like or talk about these.
Let me jump in about the Aspen Hill Pet Cemetery. They are the other one in Maryland that's known to have both humans and pets buried together. And the cat that you mentioned is Napoleon the Weather Cat on his tombstone. He has a tombstone. And John Wilkes Booth's grave is unmarked. The coins represent, pennies represent people who have visited the grave. They leave a penny to say that they were there. Sometimes you see other coins on tombstones, military tombstones. And I can't remember the exact amount, but a nickel meant one thing, a dime meant another, and a quarter meant another. One was served with them, was with them when they died. So there were different levels like that for what coin you left on a military grave.
I also want to stress too to everyone, this is by no means comprehensive. When we started talking about what we could cover in this, even within Laurel, there were so many stories. And the further out you get, the more stories there are. So even with adding on bonus editions, this was just kind of a teaser to be like, oh, go look, because there's things everywhere that you can look into. Baltimore alone has several stories, as one could imagine. Um, and DC, obviously, we're right perfectly situated halfway in the middle. That's the big pro of Laurel right there. So we can get to either one. One that is not on here is Catocin Furnace, which also has a really fascinating backstory with Black history in Maryland. That if you're interested in learning about that, I'd encourage you to go look that one up.
If you're not trick-or-treating on Halloween, Westminster Hall, where Poe is buried, has free tours. They play spooky music on their pipe organ while you're standing in line, and you can go into the church hall itself, which is now used for other events by the University of Maryland. And then you can take a tour of the catacombs underneath the church. And then you can go out into the graveyard where they have reenactors, Poe, different famous people from Baltimore. And at least the time that I went, they had popcorn and cider as well. And you got a balloon saying, "I survived the catacombs."
Yeah, thank you for that, Tina. Yes, sounds like some really fun, spooky activities as well. And Abby, you're right. Thank you. We just kind of scratched the surface, just focused on just one of the cemeteries here in Laurel. But like we heard in the comments, there's St. Mary Cemetery, there's St. Philip's, there's quite a few, especially in the greater area as well. So we'll get to some of the questions in just a little bit as well. But again, going back to Ben's cat, just real quick, I was reminded that I do know of another intact horse burial. It's on the campus of Harford Community College in Harford County, also in Bel Air, actually just very near Country Light Farm. So the community college was used to be Prospect Hill Horse Farm, which was also a thoroughbred breeding farm, racing. And it started with Durbar II, who won the Epsom Derby in 1913 in England and beat the King's Horse. So that was a very, very famous prodigy there. And it was buried intact on the campus of the college there. And again, its exact location is a little bit of a mystery. Thankfully, they did not accidentally locate it when they were doing archaeology there a couple years ago. So that's the only other intact horse burial I know kind of in the area. Okay, I am going to stop this one. So for questions, I encourage you to put them again into the chat or the Q&A. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them. And like Abby said, if you know of any stories or things that we should investigate or just to add to the narrative that we tell about Laurel, we really want to hear these. So let us know in the comments or just get in touch with us after the fact. We'll be happy to set up those meetings. So I'm just going to switch screens. I'm going to have Abby and Louise just kind of look through the chat just real quick. And then I'm going to talk about some of our upcoming announcements for some of our upcoming events. Okay, so just kind of lightening the mood a little bit, just in turning to a new subject. We have a traveling exhibit this fall. So for the rest of the year until December 22nd, the Laurel Museum is home to awkward family photos of the famous card game and Facebook fame. In addition to hosting a traveling exhibit of framed pictures that just kind of capture just the odd, the funny, the weird, and what were we thinking when we took that picture type portraits. We also have the Laurel edition. So if you do have any fun, weird family pictures, feel free to send them our way. We'll probably display them at the Laurel Museum. And in addition to the funny side, we also have Picture This, which is our display of cameras and photographs from our collection as well. So it is open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 12 to 4 with free admission. We'll be open the rest of the year until December 22nd, like I said, although we will be closed the Friday after Thanksgiving. And just real quick, we already had one workshop at the Laurel Library here in Laurel in the Prince George's County library system, but in a couple weeks we'll be at Maryland City at Russet in the Anne Arundel system. So we'll be there on October 19th. You can learn a little bit more about the history of photography and how to preserve your family photographs as well. So please join me in Russet in a couple weeks. Also, we are very excited to kick off a revival of our 1994 historic walking tour of downtown Laurel. So it's kind of updated and revised, lost and found, you might say. And we'll be looking at some of the old stories and then updating them with the new research that we've been doing in the years since. So it is a small fundraiser for the Historical Society. We're just kind of getting the ball rolling again on our walking tours. So it's $15 in advance. We're limiting each tour to 20 participants, and we will be offering more tours in the spring and in the coming months on different topics as well. And then in early November, please join us for 2 public dig days in downtown Laurel. So you don't have any experience or equipment, that's fine. We will teach you everything you need to know, and we'll be happy to get dirty with you in Laurel in November 2nd and 3rd. So please give us a call or email and we'll give you more information and sign you up for that event. And then it's kind of hard to believe, but the last of our fall speaker series is actually coming up in November. So we're doing a presentation for the new research that we've been doing since the exhibits on World War I and World War II. So we'll be doing that in November, and you'll hear from myself and Luis again, talking about some of the new research and some of the new photographs that have come our way. Again, just a quick reminder to renew or join if you have not already done so. If you like this program tonight, please send a couple dollars our way to support our programming here at the Laurel Historical Society. And then if you need to contact us, please feel free to call, email, or stop by the museum. As a reminder, we are recording this. We'll stop the recording when we get through all the questions, and then we'll send out the link in a little bit, along with any resources that we mentioned tonight. So thank you again for being here with us, and I'm gonna check back in with Abby and Luis and see if Tina has anything else up her sleeve to offer us for our burial, unusual burial topics tonight. Okay, so what are we looking like for questions? I think we talked about some already.
We do have a couple questions. We do one more. And Tina, correct me if I'm wrong. I think there is another fully intact horse buried at Belmont in Howard County.
I believe you're right. That's in Howard County. And I can't remember the horse's name, but there's one, maybe even 2 horses buried there. And I believe this is going back a few years, but I think they're buried standing up.
That sounds correct. And for my Nashville person, this gets extra confusing because Howard County has a Belmont that has horses just like Nashville has a Belmont that has horses, because why not give them the same name? We did have a couple questions. So Nancy, you asked, where exactly is John Wilkes Booth's unmarked grave? His final resting place is at Greenmount Cemetery in the Booth family plot. He was originally buried at the penitentiary along with his co-conspirators. He was buried twice there in two separate spots, and then he eventually was released to his family, and they were the ones who decided to bury him in an unmarked grave, still within the family plot, because his brother, I believe, was concerned about vandalism or people coming as thrill seekers to see the grave. So there is some controversy too. Some people don't believe the unmarked grave is actually his. So if you want to deep dive on if you think that's actually where he's buried or not, that's a fun conspiracy for you for the evening. We did get a question as well from Kelly for the group. Was it a common practice to bury deceased stillborn infants in existing family members' graves?
Yes. It was very common. And people were surprised at the number of stillbirths and very young children that are buried in graves. And as an aside, a lot of people look at footstones in graves. Footstones are the smaller markers that usually have a couple initials on them, standing for the first and last name. Sometimes they have more than that, but usually it's just the initials. And those are at the foot of the grave. The headstones at the top of the grave, the footstones at the bottom of the grave, but they are not representing children's graves with initials only.
Okay. One thing to add related to that too is there is a grave at Ivy Hill that is for a stillborn infant. That is an isolated grave by itself, which is kind of unusual for the time period that it's at, just as an aside, since that was asked. Let's see, what else did we ask? Kelly asked directly to us, but I'll go ahead and address it. Has Ivy Hill ever been a stop on the McSeany March? Ivy Hill was not a stop on the McSeany March, like in isolation. It was something that was walked by in the route originally. However, in 1991, the Historical Society did do a large Ivy Hill Cemetery tour. That's where some of the research that was used tonight came from. It was kind of the original start of this research by John Calder Brennan, who used to be involved with the Historical Society prior to his passing. We're very thankful for the research he did, along with many other people who were involved with the society.
Yeah, and I know Kelly's asking a couple questions about Ivy Hill, and you've given us some good ideas for possible future tours. Just scratching the surface of Ivy Hill, like Abby mentioned, you find a lot of fascinating history and people, a lot of sensitive topics, but also really fascinating topics as well. That connects us to our loved ones and to the history of our area. So we are planning to do some sort of cemetery or some sort of historical programming related to the cemeteries. I know both at St. Philip's and Ivy Hill Cemetery, for example, going back a couple years to some research that we were doing on the 19th Amendment and women's suffrage, that some of the early Laurel suffragists were buried in both of those two cemeteries. So we will be exploring different thematical or topical walking tours coming up. Okay. Yep, and Jeannie said that Ivy Hill is very nice to walk through, and yeah, it's nice to see old names, as Abby mentioned in the beginning of her talk. You know, there's a lot of family names that are recognizable because generations of the same family are still here, as well as friends and neighbors in Laurel and beyond. And there's also more stories to tell about the people who lived and worked and died in Laurel and are buried elsewhere, like across town in Mount Zion, or down at Queen's Chapel, through from St. Mark's Church, for example, since they don't have a burying yard at their church. So there's a lot more stories to tell, and we hope that we have kind of piqued your interest and curiosity in learning more about the history of Laurel and its unusual burials here in Laurel and in the general area. And this is kind of the perfect season to kind of reconnect and to kind of ground yourself in some of these unknown histories of the area. So does anyone have any additional questions or comments? I think we'll take a couple more questions, but I'm going to stop the recording right now, but we'll stay on for a few more minutes. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you especially to Tina for joining us again for another really informative talk, and just to talk about all these topics just off the top of your head. Luis and Abby, thank you so much for your help and your research tonight. And with that, we will say goodnight. I'll stop the recording and be back with you shortly. Thanks again, everyone.